Welcome to Cheating Chronicles. When she left me, there was one question I desperately sought an answer to, but she never provided it. Instead, she simply said she had to go. Yet, she also told me she still cared for me. I never got the resolution I was expecting, just her silent exit and a lingering sense of uncertainty. That was 5 years ago. Now, she's found me again. That be why then, I had completely transformed my life. I sold my old house, closed down my business, and relocated to a different city. I was determined to erase every trace of my former life, working relentlessly to leave no hint behind. My wealth was safeguarded through a complicated network of trusts. The first trust transferred its funds into an offshore account, which then funneled through another trust, and repeated this process until the money finally reached me. It wasn't designed to evade the law, but to ensure no one could trace my movements. The only ones who knew every detail were the tax authorities. But that wasn't the purpose. I wasn't trying to avoid taxes, just trying to disappear. She found me anyway. My name is Logan Whitaker. I'm 31 years old and I work as a day trader. I was fortunate enough to inherit money from my grandfather after I completed my degree, which allowed me to dive into the world of investing. I kept about $25,000 of the inheritance for my personal interest in small-cap stocks and invested the rest in well-established stocks that provided steady returns. But perhaps the most interesting investment I made was in a struggling business that produced hardware. They manufactured bolts, screws, nails, and other essential items used by people across various sectors every day. That I first met Elena Marinos when she was 19, and I was 21. We spent a few years dating on and off, a connection with its ups and downs, but never fully severed. Eventually, I gathered the courage to ask her to marry me. To my surprise, she refused, but she wasn't harsh about it. Elena told me she loved me and that if I wanted exclusivity, we could continue in that direction. She even said that if she ever married, it would be to me. However, she made it clear that our physical relationship was good and should continue as long as we both were willing. It was an unusual statement, but one that I accepted, not knowing what the future would bring. After about 2 years together, Elena told me she was planning a family trip to reconnect with some of her extended family. She mentioned that the trip would last between 3 to 5 months. As usual, she expressed her love for me, and in the weeks before her departure, she was determined to make the most of our time together, engaging in a whirlwind of passion. She left in late March, and her return was expected by mid-August. While she was away, we stayed in contact through letters and phone calls, and everything seemed fine at first. But by early July, something changed. Communication from her stopped abruptly. I waited, thinking it was just a temporary pause, but as the weeks went on, I realized she wasn't coming back. She never returned to me. It wasn't until recently that I heard from her again that I was angry, hurt, and confused. 7 months after our last contact, I decided to leave town. I sold my company for a decent profit and moved my investments into a blind trust. I relocated to Denver and started over. For nearly a year and a half, I swore off women. I didn't date. I kept all interactions with women minimal and even refused to tell my family where I was living. They might have told Elena if she contacted them. I bought a new company and hired only men, which surprised me given how many men were looking for office jobs. My sales team and administrative assistant were all men. About 2 years later, I met Alyssa, a woman who seemed a bit mysterious. We dated for about 4 months before I realized there wasn't much passion. We ended things as semi-friends. I re-entered the dating scene, but as my business took off, I remained firm about keeping things professional. I followed the Buddhist principle of not mixing business with pleasure. Despite dating, I hadn't found anyone who truly excited me. I didn't want to get too involved. I had learned that a friends with benefits approach was the only kind of relationship that worked for me. If any woman couldn't accept that, she didn't get a second date. One Saturday morning in June, just over 5 years after Elena left, I was walking through City Park when I heard someone call my name, Logan. No one in Denver knew that nickname. I turned around, and there she was. Elena had returned. She approached, reaching out as though to hug me. I stepped back, out of her reach. Elena looked confused and hurt. "What's wrong? Aren't you glad to see me?" she asked. "Elena, if you were the last woman in this city, I'd leave, I said. I was promised by a certain woman that she'd come back in 4 or 5 months. 3.5 months later, she stopped communicating with me. I waited 6 months before I gave up and moved on. It's still Marino's, isn't it? Or are you married now? I know you loved me, but I didn't think you'd still be waiting for me after I didn't return. I waited 6 months. I had to sell my company and move. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why didn't you contact me and explain? Why did you not come back as promised? Why are you here now and not out of my life? She began crying. I didn't just hurt you. I destroyed you. I'm so sorry. I replied, you did destroy me. In the last 5 years, I've only dated 5 women. Most of them in the last 6 months. Please, for God's sake, get out of my life. You've damaged me deeply. I turned around and walked away. But that didn't stop her. Elena was at the office door before we opened, so I refused to go near her. When I pushed the panic bar from inside, she tried making an appointment through my secretary. I told him if he didn't cancel it, he'd be looking for a new job. Then she showed up at my house, parked across from the gate. I ignored her and went to my usual diner. When I was paying for my meal, she showed up again. If I see your face within 1,000 feet of me, I'll file a stalking complaint. Do I make myself clear? She just nodded and left. That didn't work either. She managed to get a job with one of my best clients, and when they invited me to a welcome dinner, I walked in and saw her smirking. I immediately told the client I wouldn't be dealing with his new employee anymore. I left before the dinner started. The next day, I called a meeting with my senior staff. I'm selling the business. I have a major personal issue that I can't resolve here. I'll entertain buyout offers from any of you, or I'll consider ideas for restructuring. But either way, I'm leaving Denver in 6 weeks. After some discussion, my head accountant, Martin, suggested I take the company public. That way, you can retain voting stock and appoint a COO, he said. I agreed to consider it. I contacted my broker, and he was enthusiastic about the potential for an IPO. My company had a regional reputation, and I was told I would need a comprehensive audit and company evaluation. I arranged for 3 firms to perform due diligence. Meanwhile, I also listed my house for sale. There were 2 interested buyers. One was a young couple with a small inheritance, and the other was a young Greek woman offering a 7% premium over asking price. When I found out that the buyer was Elena, I countered with a deal that the couple accepted. But Elena wasn't done. She continued to call me and even tried contacting my lawyer. Eventually, I sought a restraining order against her. Despite this, she continued trying to find ways to disrupt my life. She even managed to track down my new address, but once the restraining order was in place, things stopped.